Hi, my name is Anna Kunto from the University of Texas at Austin, and in this video I'll provide a brief overview of the manual contents and the needed materials for the Pirate Math Equation Quest Small Group Intervention with Total, Difference, Change, and Equal Group Schemas. So this intervention is a group intervention where one teacher works with a group of 3 to 4 students, as we see in this picture here. The Pirate Math Equation Quest group intervention was developed to support third grade students in Tier 2 and 3 small group intervention who require supplemental math support in solving word problems. So the focus of this intervention is on single and double digit additive and multiplicative word problems in 4 schemas: total schemas, difference schemas, change schemas, and equal group schemas, where the equal group schema is the multiplicative schema. Scientific evaluations of Pirate Math Equation Quest have indicated that at-risk third grade students with and without math disabilities who performed in the lowest 13th percentile of their classes demonstrate improved word problem performance with Pirate Math Equation Quest as compared to students who did not participate in the Pirate Math Equation Quest small group intervention. So the group manual includes 3 sets of materials: the teacher materials, student materials, and supplemental materials. The teacher materials include lesson guides, activity guides, and supplemental materials. The student materials include lesson packets and supplemental materials, and the supplemental materials include posters, maps, cards, and graphs. You'll notice that supplemental materials are written with the teacher materials and student materials, as they're necessary for both teacher and student to complete the intervention, but they're also included in the supplemental materials section as well. So the Pirate Math Equation Quest small group intervention is implemented 3 times per week for 13 weeks, and each lesson lasts roughly 30 to 35 minutes. Each lesson in the group intervention has 5 components as seen here: MathLike Flashcards, which is a 2 to 3 minute component; Equation Quest, which is a 5-minute activity; Buccaneer Problems, which is a 15 to 18-minute activity; Shipshape Sorting, which is a 2 to 3-minute activity; and the Jolly Roger Review, which is a 5-minute activity. I'll review each of these components on the following slides, but for more information about each of these activities, you can watch our other videos. So the first component of every lesson is MathLike Flashcards, which is a 2 to 3-minute activity. So in this activity, students complete 2 1-minute trials of either addition and subtraction flashcards or multiplication and division flashcards in a round robin. Students complete addition and subtraction flashcards for lessons 1 through 30, and then once the equal group schema is introduced, students begin using multiplication and division flashcards for lessons 31 through 39. After each trial and the students answer as many flashcards as they can in a minute, the teacher and students count the correct number of flashcards. Throughout the activity, teachers also monitor and provide feedback as necessary using counting up strategies. At the end of the activity, the students or the teacher graphs the higher score for the day on the MathLike Flashcard graph. The second activity in the intervention is Equation Quest, which is a roughly 5-minute activity. In this activity, students receive instruction on solving equations and the meaning of the equal sign. Students use cubes, as we see here. They also draw pictures and practice isolating the variable to balance the 2 sides of the equation. And this activity is used to help students develop their pre-algebraic reasoning skills, and it also aids them in solving equations once they learn to set them up in Buccaneer Problems. The next activity, the third activity of each lesson, are the Buccaneer Problems, which is a 15 to 18-minute activity. In this activity, students receive schema-based word problem instruction as they work with the teacher to solve total, difference, change, and equal groups word problems. They also receive instruction on the run-attack strategy, as we see here. And again, they also learn how to solve total, difference, change, and equal group schemas and use the following posters to aid them in solving each type of word problem. They also use the What Do You Ask Yourself poster to help differentiate between the different types of word problem schemas. So again, this is a guided practice activity where the teacher and the student work together to solve these 3 problems of each lesson. So here we see the first 2 problems in a Buccaneer problem activity, and then there would be 1 more page with the third word problem for the students and teacher to solve. The fourth activity is Shipshape Sorting, which is a 2 to 3 minute activity. So in this activity, students practice identifying word problem schemas learned during the Buccaneer Problems by reading a word problem card, an example of which we see here, and sorting them onto a map, which we see here, during a 1 minute timing. So students identify the word problem card as belonging to either the total, difference, or change schema. In the Pirate Math Equation Quest small group intervention, students are also introduced to the Equal Groups Schema, but there are no Equal Group cards included in the Shipshape Sorting materials. If teachers want Equal Group cards, they are welcome to make their own and include an Equal Group spot on the Shipshape Sorting mat. The final activity of every lesson is the Jolly Roger Review, which is a 5-minute activity. So here, students complete a 2-part independent practice. The first part is a 1-minute timing, which is one of 3 different activities. It's either an addition and subtraction problems, as we see here, bracketing the compare sentence and labeling G and L once difference problems have been introduced, or writing the 4 schema equations. The second part of the Jolly Roger Review is a 2-minute timing for solving word problems. After the student has completed both the top and bottom portion of the Jolly Roger Review, teachers provide feedback on both sections at the end of the activity and score the Jolly Roger Review. So here we see the lesson schedule for the Pirate Math Equation Quest small group intervention. So there are 39 lessons in the intervention, which are spread out over 13 weeks. For lessons 1 through 3, students focus on counting up, addition, and subtraction. So oftentimes students with math disability struggle with fluency and require remediation of these skills to ensure correct computation when solving word problems. So in counting up, addition, and subtraction in these lessons, students learn explicit strategies to facilitate addition and subtraction computation in these lessons so that they can fluently use those skills throughout the rest of the program. In lessons 4 through 10, students learn about total problems. In lessons 11 through 18, students learn about difference problems. In lessons 19 through 27, they learn about change problems. In lessons 28 through 36, they learn about equal groups problems. And finally, in lessons 37 through 39, students review all 4 types of problems and learn to differentiate between the different schemas. So as I mentioned, the Pirate Math Equation Quest Small Group Intervention Manual contains 3 sections: teacher materials, student materials, and supplemental materials. So first I'm going to talk about the teacher materials. So the teacher materials consist of lesson guides and activity guides, and it also consists of supplemental materials. But as I mentioned, those are included in the teacher materials, student materials, but they're also included in their own section, so I'll talk about them when we get to the supplemental materials section of the manual. So first let's talk about the lesson guides. Lesson guides provide a step-by-step guide for teachers on how to implement a lesson. It's important that teachers review lesson guides before each lesson to ensure that they cover every concept addressed in the lesson. These lesson guides are not meant to be recited verbatim and instead should be used as a guide. So some teachers use them to create an outline, others keep them on hand to use as a reference during the lesson, and others rely heavily on the wording of the lesson guides to deliver the lesson. However you choose or prefer to use the lesson guides, it is important regardless to study the lesson before delivering it to students so that you're fluent with the concepts that are going to be addressed that day. It's also important that teachers elaborate on concepts as necessary depending on a group of students. So if a group of students is struggling with counting up, but the lesson guides don't focus on counting up that day, it's still important for the teachers to elaborate on those concepts to best support their students. Each lesson guide is labeled with the corresponding lesson number. So for instance, the lesson guide for lesson 1 is labeled, as we see here, as lesson 1. Next, we see the activities covered in each lesson listed in the scroll. So we see MathLike Flashcards, Equation Quest, Buccaneer Problem, with the focus of the Buccaneer Problems that day. So in lesson 1, that's counting up, addition, and subtraction, Shipshape Sorting, and the Jolly Roger Review. You'll notice in this lesson guide example that Equation Quest and Shipshape Sorting are crossed out. That's because these 2 components, these 2 activities, are not taught in this specific lesson. So Equation Quest is crossed out in lesson 1 because it's not introduced until lesson 2, and Shipshape Sorting is crossed out in this because it's not introduced until lesson 7. Next, we see the materials section, which has posters, student materials, and teacher materials. Teachers should review the list of the materials needed and make sure they have them all ready prior to the lesson. Next, we have the lesson guide dialogue. In the dialogue, teacher dialogue is bolded, like we see here, and student responses are unbolded. You'll also notice that when a new poster is introduced, it's signaled by italics and then a picture of the poster. So for example, here the rules poster is introduced, so it says display rules poster, and then there's also an image of the rules poster, again to signal that the rules poster should be posted for students to use. So the next component of the teacher materials is are the activity guides. So here we see an example of the Equation Quest activity guides. Activity guides are used when teachers become familiar and comfortable with lesson content and sequencing, and so instead of following the lesson dialogue, they may choose to print and refer to the activity guides during the lessons. The activity guides highlight procedures for implementing core lesson components. So some teachers choose to exclusively use lesson guides or activity guides, while others prefer to use them in combination with lesson guides. There are activity guides for the run attack strategy, total problems, difference problems, change problems, Equal Groups Problems, MathLike Flashcards, Equation Quest, Shipshape Sorting, and the Jolly Roger Review. So as I mentioned, the second portion of the manual is the student materials. The student materials consist of the lesson packets and the supplemental materials, which I'll talk about later. So the student materials needed for each lesson are organized in a packet by lesson. So all the necessary materials for one lesson are in one packet. So the Equation Quest worksheet for lesson 1, the Buccaneer Problem worksheets for lesson 1, and the Jolly Roger Review worksheet for lesson 1 are all found in one packet. Teachers should print out these worksheets, this packet, ahead of time, double-sided and stapled in the top left-hand corner. And as I mentioned, each packet includes 4 pages. Page 1 is Equation Quest. Page 2 and 3 are the Buccaneer Problems, which are 3 problems, A, B, and C. And page 4 is always the Jolly Roger Review. In Equation Quest, students practice solving equations and learn about the meaning of the equal sign. However, it's important to note there is no Equation Quest for lesson 1. So for lesson 1, page 1 is left blank, and an Equation Quest begins on lesson 2. The Buccaneer Problems are a guided practice opportunity for students to solve word problem and for teachers to provide feedback. There are always 2 pages with a total of 3 problems, problems A, B, and C. Finally, page 4 is the Jolly Roger Review, which is an independent practice activity. This is an opportunity for students to demonstrate their understanding of concepts. The top is always a 1-minute timed activity, which is one of 3 activities. It's either addition and subtraction fluency, practicing bracketing the compare sentence and labeling G&L once difference problems have been introduced, or students practice writing all 4 schema equations. The bottom is a 2-minute timed word problem exercise, where students independently use the skills they've learned in Equation Quest and Buccaneer Problems to solve the word problem. And then once the student has completed both sections of the Jolly Roger Review, the teachers score and review the problem. So the student receives 1 point for each correct answer on the top portion, and the student can receive a total of 2 points in the bottom portion, 1 point for the correct number answer and 1 point for the correct label answer. So the final section of the manual are the supplemental materials. And as I mentioned before, the supplemental materials are found at the end of the teacher materials, the end of the student materials, and then also in their own section, the supplemental materials section. So the supplemental materials contain all the materials necessary for teachers and students to implement the lesson. So it contains the counting up, addition, and subtraction poster, seen here, the MathLike Flashcards, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, all 4 types of flashcards, the MathLike Flashcard graph, the run attack strategy poster, and the schema posters. Here we see the total problem, but the difference, change, and equal groups problem posters are also included. They're just not seen here, as well as the what do you ask yourself poster. It also includes the Shipshape Sorting cards and sorting mat, the Power Math Equation Quest rules, and the 4 different versions of the treasure map. You'll also notice that the slide shows some required materials that are not provided. Examples of these materials are the treasure box and the prizes, coins, which we don't see here, but are still needed, the timer, different colored cubes, and a pencil. For the small group intervention, students also need dry erase board, painter's tape, a dry erase board marker, and an eraser, which is used to assist students in solving equal groups problems. And again, those materials are necessary but are not included. So the first poster that teachers and students need the teachers need to display for students throughout the lesson is the Pirate Math Rules poster. So teachers need to print this out and display during the intervention for students to use. Then, as the curriculum advances and students become familiar with the information on the posters, teachers can fade out the posters. So this is the rules poster, and in the beginning lessons were as needed to remind students of behavior expectations. Teachers post and review this poster with students. And this is also used in combination with the treasure map and coins to create a behavioral token economy. And for more information on that, you can see our behavior management video or our motivation video. The supplemental materials also contains 4 different versions of the treasure map, as we see here, which are used to create a token economy. So during the lesson, students earn coins and place them on the treasure map, and then color in the designated number of spaces at the end of each lesson. Students receive a prize from the treasure box once the entire treasure map is completed. So it's important that teachers should print out a treasure map before the lesson, and they can vary the versions of the treasure map they use throughout the intervention, or they can use the same treasure map for each lesson. It's up to them, their preference, and the students' preferences. And again, for more information, you can see our motivation video. Next, we see our counting up, addition, and subtraction poster. This, like our other posters, is used to be displayed throughout the intervention for students to use and reference. So teachers need to print the poster out, preferably on cardstock, and display it for students to use as a reference. As the curriculum advances and students become comfortable with the content on the posters, teachers can fade out the posters so the students are no longer relying on the posters. So this is the counting up, addition, and subtraction poster, and it's the strategy used in Pirate Math Equation Quest to aid students in the addition and subtraction computation during MathLike Flashcards, Buccaneer Problems, and the Jolly Roger Review. And you can also see our counting up video for more information. Next, we see the MathLike Flashcards and the MathLike Flashcard graph. So the MathLike Flashcard activity requires a flashcards and graph, both of which are provided. It also requires a timer, which is not provided. So for lessons 1 through 30, the teacher needs the addition and subtraction flashcards, and for lessons 31 through 39, once the equal group schema is introduced, teachers need the multiplication and division flashcards. Teachers need to print out and cut the flashcards prior to the lesson, and we suggest using cardstock. You'll notice that the addition, subtraction, multiplication, division problem is on the front, and the correct answer is on the back. The graph should also be printed out prior to the lesson, so it's available to use during the MathLike Flashcard activity. And again, for more information, you can see our MathLike Flashcard video. Next, we see our run attack strategy, our 4 different schema posters, and our what do you ask yourself poster. Just like all the other posters, teachers need to print out these posters, preferably on cardstock, ahead of time so that they can be displayed during the interventions for students to use. And with all the other posters, as students become comfortable and familiar with the content on the posters, teachers can then fade out the posters. So first we see our run poster, which is the attack strategy used to set up word problems. Next we see our schema posters, the total, difference, and change, which are our additive schema posters, and our equal groups poster, which is our multiplicative schema poster. So teachers display these posters as the specific schemas are introduced. So when you introduce total problems, the total one's introduced. When you introduce difference problems, both would be introduced, or just the difference depending on what type of problem students are working on that day. Change problems when change poster when the change problems are introduced, and again the equal groups problem poster when equal groups problems are introduced. And these posters display the specific steps for setting up and solving word problems after a schema is identified. Finally, you'll notice our what do you ask yourself poster, which is displayed after all 4 schemas have been introduced, which is lesson 29. And this poster aids students in differentiating between the 4 schemas by providing a prompt, and it also encourages students to gesture and to use specific questioning in order to decide which schema a word problem belongs to. So next we see our Shipshape sorting mat and cards. In the Shipshape sorting activity, students practice sorting word problems into schemas. To do this, they need the cards, as seen here, and the sorting mat, both of which are found in the supplemental materials. The cards have a word problem on the front and the corresponding schema on the back, with either a T for total, a D for difference, or a C for change. Teachers, like the flashcards, should print these out and cut them out before the lesson begins, and again, we suggest using cardstock. Also in the small group intervention, students are introduced to the equal group schema, but there are no equal group cards. So if teachers do want some equal group cards, they can make their own and add them to the mix. Next, we see the Shipshape Sorting mat. This also needs to be printed out before the lesson so that students can use it to sort the cards onto. Lastly, we do see a timer here. A timer is necessary to complete the activity, but again, the timer is not provided and teachers need to find their own in order to implement this activity. Next, here we see materials that are used throughout the program but that are not included in this manual. So we see a treasure box and prizes. You can use any box that closes, any small prizes students like. We used ladybugs, toy cars, pencils, just small things that students would like. And it's used at the end of the lesson when students have completed all the spaces on the treasure map. We also see treasure coins. You can use stickers, stamps, markers, colored pencils instead if you don't have treasure coins lying around. And you can use these throughout the lesson to reinforce positive behavior. You'll also notice that there are silver and gold coins and some dark brown or gray ones. When we implement this intervention, oftentimes the gold coin would be used as 2 spaces as an additional incentive when students were really exhibiting positive behavior that we wanted to reinforce, instead of a silver coin or a brown coin, which is just used to cover 1 space. So it can be used as an extra way to really reinforce positive behavior that you're seeing. Next, you'll see the timer, which is used during MathLike Flashcards, Shipshape Sorting, and the Jolly Roger review, and this can be purchased at a teacher's supply store. You'll see a pencil, which students need to complete each lesson. We see cubes, which is used during equation class to develop pre-algebraic reasoning, and it can also be purchased at a teacher's supply store. And finally, at the bottom, we see a dry erase board, painter's tape, a dry erase board marker, and an eraser. So you'll notice on this board, we used the whiteboard and the painter's tape to help students learn to set up and solve equal groups problems. So we have GR to write the groups, N is the number of groups. We see an X as the multiplication sign and P for the product. So we use this to help students understand they need to determine the groups and the number in each group to find the product, and it was used to assist students in solving equal groups problems. Again, it's important to note that all these pieces, all these materials are necessary to complete the intervention, but they are not provided, and teachers are responsible for gathering them on their own. So now let's look at some examples of different setups teachers used to blah, 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 blah. Now let's look at some examples of ways teachers set up their space in order for students to complete the intervention. So here you'll notice that all of our posters are displayed. We see the run and total poster, the difference and change poster, the equal groups poster, and the what do you ask yourself poster, as well as the rules poster and the counting up poster. All of those posters are displayed and available for students to use as necessary. Pencils are sharpened. The student packet is printed out and stapled in the top left-hand corner. We also notice the dry erase board with blue painter's tape, the dry erase marker, and the eraser. We see the MathLike Flashcards and graph, the Shipshape Sorting cards and mat, and a timer. And finally, we see the treasure map with treasure coins, and we see some spaces already colored in. Here we see another example of a teacher working with students. We notice that the lesson guides are stapled and printed out in front of each student. The timer is on the table and ready for the teacher to use. Pencils are sharpened, the MathLike flashcard graph is printed out, and the posters has been faded out as this is a later lesson in the intervention. So in this video, I provided an overview of the manual contents and the needed materials for the Pirate Math Equation Quest small group intervention with total difference, change, and equal group schemas. I'd like to recognize IES, the University of Texas at Austin, and the Meadows Center for Preventing Educational Risk. Without their support, this research would not have been possible. Thanks for watching.